We continue to talk about some of the stock movers this morning. Jenny Horne, host of Next Gen Investing, is with me. Good morning to you, Jenny. I know you're a couple of names here. We're looking at some of the big movers. How about U.S. Steel? We have that story happening.
We do. So we did see an announcement from U.S. Steel as well as Nippon Steel that announced Trump has approved now the company's historic partnership that will unleash what is being seen as unprecedented investments in steelmaking now in the U.S., as well as a perceived way to create more than 100,000 jobs. So we know that at the end of May of just this year, the partnership was celebrated by thousands of steel workers with President Trump at U.S. Steel's Irvin plant at the Mon Valley Works in West Mifflin, Pennsylvania. In addition to President Trump's executive order approving the partnership, the companies have entered into a national security agreement with the U.S. government. The NSA does provide that approximately $11 billion in the new investments will be made by 2028, which includes the initial investment in the Greenfield project that will again be completed by year 2028. So along with President Trump's executive order, the companies have completed the U.S. Department now's overall Justice Department's review process. And so with those approvals, all necessary regulatory approvals for the partnerships have now been received, as well as the partnership is expected to now be finalized relatively promptly. So all that to be said, I think that we know that this deal is favorable, of course, to the steel industry, as well as to the really focus on domestication of so many of these commodity businesses. So this is definitely in step with President Trump's overall plan and everything he's been working towards with various tariffs and trade policy. And I think that oftentimes the street does not like unknowns. So at least we have more of a concrete deal. And we're seeing, I mean, a lot of these steel names led by U.S. Steel today really higher the pre-market. So U.S. Steel, I mean, up almost 5%, which is a pretty big move for the company historically this morning.
So the fact that they added the national security parameters in there, I think that's what really people were concerned about this partnership. And, you know, you do have Nippon acquiring 100% stake, but there are, I guess, some caveats, parameters, and things going forward. And a nice jump here for U.S. Steel stock this morning.
Yeah, I mean, a really nice move here, and what they're calling now this golden share, which is what gives the government basically this extraordinary amount of influence over a U.S. company, is definitely being read as a way to give, yes, the Trump administration, or Trump in particular, this extraordinary control, but many do say that it will serve as a model for other deals. I'll be curious to know what that looks like, because I do know that as far as overall M&A and even IPO activity, well, there was a lot of expectations for this administration. We haven't seen that play out to the high expectations. So I would like to see more of this deal making, which many say this golden share, which I love that term, is going to maybe set a precedent for future deals.
I saw some buy ratings on AMD on Friday. The news and positive news continues to swirl around AMD. Let's talk a little bit about that name.
Yeah, the AMD has been interesting because it's been so really disappointing in light of what we've seen from NVIDIA. And I mean, this has been, at one point, was perceived actually as like the number 2 maybe in the AI arms race, but it's been a while, and the chart will illustrate this, that we've seen really that same momentum. So Piper Sandler, though, with some favorability, not to discredit AMD's positive news this morning, as we have a price target of 140, up from 125 with an overweight rating, saying that AMD was caught up with the financial community on Friday after their quarterly pre-quarter close call. They overall are enthused now with the product launches that we saw last week announced at AMD, specifically the Helios rack, which they do think is pivotal now for AMD to grow in terms of a more distinct way. They do expect a snapback for GPU, its overall business, by the fourth quarter of 2025, when most of the China-related charges are through. The firm also noted that the largest of the business units, namely clients, are starting to see some pull-ins. So all that to be said, I mean, they do still maintain their overweight rating. This name is actually making a nice move this morning, but we have seen, again, such disappointment. I think it's encouraging to see overwhelmingly streets still say there's an opportunity for AMD, because you have to believe this is still a massively powerful and important name, especially right now in the overall AI build. I mean, if you're a believer in AI, I think AMD is still a massive player in the space, just maybe a bit more left for dead. And unfortunately, the AI conference we had last week with more product unveils, well, were positive developments. I mean, like further advancements in their every pretty much architecture of their GPUs. It was not read at all by the street because we saw barely any movement to the upside as a result of some pretty good product launches. So maybe finally getting some credit where credit is due, because they have been really reshaping and building and enhancing a lot of that technology.
And just the big picture as you talk about technology, I mean, we see we're not too far off record highs. I think that's worth noting for the NASDAQ, the triple Qs. At the same time, you know, we're looking here at a market that is jumping and rebounding after what we saw on Friday. And here I'm reading the S&P 500 historically moves higher after wars. You know, I don't know what you want to call what has occurred over the last 72 hours or so. But anyhow, a final quick thought here as we have some up arrows this morning.
No, and I do feel like right now what we're seeing, thankfully, is a lot of these, I mean, like failed breakdowns. We've only seen, I mean, pretty much rallies that have held, especially last week, in spite of what should be, I'd say, maybe perceived as more serious headlines. But I think it also goes to show the market's right now appetite for that risk. And perhaps just the resiliency is, hey, we've had a lot of frightening headlines this year, not to like say one is more important than the other, but somehow the market is able to just brush it off. And it's definitely not bad for the bulls, but it does make you wonder then, like, long term what some of this looks like. But I think to see these failed breakdowns of what has been a pretty nice comeback in the overall markets, we're pretty much at all-time highs, has been amazing to witness.
Thank you, Jenny Horne. Great to see you this morning.